Welcome back to the Vince Coglianese Show. You know, a recent Washington Post ABC News poll showed that 54% of Americans would prefer Donald Trump was back in charge of our economy. Just 36% think that Joe Biden's doing a good job. Joe Biden is really lagging behind on that indicator, and that's why you've heard him talk so much lately about something called Bidenomics, whatever that is. For more on this subject and so much more, I want to bring in Ted Harvey. He is the chairman of the Committee to Defeat the President, and he joins us now. Ted, great to have you with us today.
Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Bidenomics, what do you make of the president running on something so many people are struggling with right now?
Well, it's bizarre. You're right that the economy is collapsing for most families. You look at the price of gasoline; it's over $4 in many states. You look at the price of food; it's through the roof. The economy is not doing well for most families around the country, and this administration is so tone deaf that they think running on Bidenomics is a good thing to run on. And then you see yesterday when the Fed raised interest rates one more time to try to curb inflation. Inflation is so out of control that the Federal Reserve has their hands tied, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And this administration is running on Bidenomics.
And that inflation means that people are poorer now than they were when Joe Biden took office. Real wages have dropped, and your money is not going quite as far as it used to. And everybody's feeling that. And so the talking points seem like kind of hilarious, actually, that they would even think that they could trick people into thinking the economy is good.
Well, what else are they going to run on? They're not going to run on the success of their foreign policy. You look at what happened in Afghanistan. You look at what's happening with Saudi Arabia going away from the petrodollar, and Russia and China going off of the dollar, and then you see what's going on in Ukraine. Literally every time you turn around when it comes to foreign policy, it's a disaster. So now they've got to look for something to run on, and they've chosen to run on the economy.
Right. And the other piece of it seems to be that they've chosen running on demonizing and torturing their top political opponent. This seems with each passing day, we get another headline about some new persecution against Donald Trump, designed, it looks like, to keep him at the top of the headlines as the villain when, in fact, people are suffering under the current regime.
And every time they go after him, his poll numbers go up. I think the American people can see right through what the Justice Department is trying to do and what district attorneys across the country are trying to do, and that's trying to mark up the president going into the election. And I think the American people are sick of watching this. They've been watching it since 2015 when he came down the escalator. The FBI and the CIA has been going after after President Trump, and the American people can see right through it. And every time they go after him, his poll numbers go up.
Ted Harvey, in your estimation, how corrupt is our Justice Department right now?
At the top echelon, 100%. I mean, it's impossible to deny that. You look at the way they literally tried to bring down the Trump administration with the entire time. Then you look at they had the Hunter Biden laptop in 2019, and they said nothing about it. They covered up Hunter Biden's and Joe Biden's crimes when they knew that they were there. We now have the whistleblowers that are showing from the FBI and the IRS showing that there was plenty of evidence, bank account evidence, showing that there was all kinds of corruption going on with Vice President Biden and his family. And the FBI and the CIA and the Justice Department did nothing to bring that to the attention of the American people, because their sole goal was to make sure that Donald Trump didn't get reelected.
Right.
And now you see with this plea deal, they were hoping that they could just brush it under the carpet and say, move on, we've already dealt with it. But thank God for the whistleblowers that came forward, and thank God we took back control of the House so we could get to the bottom of this.
Sure, and thank God for that judge this week in Delaware who seemed to see right through what the Biden team and the Justice Department were doing. They wanted to give Hunter Biden and the Biden family, by extension, blanket immunity inside of a document that wasn't even the actual plea agreement. She threw the red flag on it and said, we have to come back to this at some future date because this just does not smell right.
That's right. And not to mention the the judge that ruled on the censoring, the federal government censoring all of the social media platforms, if it wasn't for some real honest judges that believed in the rule of law, this Justice Department would be trying to control the United States rather than the American people who are the voters and the bosses. We have such corruption at the top of our government that we need to get somebody in there that will clean it out. And I think Donald Trump is not going to go in naive this time if he gets reelected. And I think he's probably the best person out there to drain the swamp.
So you think he learned the lessons from his last presidency? He was so actively undermined throughout that presidency by people who were within the government. You think he's got his head in a swivel now for that?
Well, you look at who he appointed right out of the bat when he hired Ryan Priebus to be his chief of staff and others throughout the government. And they undermined him every step of the way. And I think that he learned a big lesson. I think he has found who his people are that he can trust. And I think that they will go in there and they will actually implement the policies that the president wanted to implement from the get-go, but nobody would support it. And I think that's my number one goal, is to mete out all of the corruption in the FBI and the CIA and the NSA and the IRS and the Justice Department. And I don't see any other candidate out there that I trust will do that. Will Trump do it? I don't know, but I think he's the only one that has a chance to do it. And if we don't do it, we are not a democracy. We are run by the oligarchs in the deep state of our country, and we're no longer a democracy, and that should scare everybody.
These agencies have really become tyrannical over time, from everything from their behavior as it involves getting interfering in elections, to some of the headlines we're seeing lately, actually throughout the Biden administration, on the efforts to censor the American public, to shut down conversation on social media that goes against whatever talking points the Biden administration has. Did you ever imagine it would get this bad in your country, Ted?
Of course not. When you and I grew up, this was never even be considered that the government would be this overtly, unapologetically attacking its own citizens. And that's where we are right now. And the American people need to stand up and take their country back. And that means we've got to elect hardcore, solid conservatives to the U.S. House of Representatives and to the Senate. Because if we don't do that, Donald Trump or whoever will be the next Republican president, their hands will be tied and we won't be able to deal with this issue. There's got to be some serious reforms that say that there are consequences for illegal behavior by going after the American citizens and censoring them and intimidating them. Because right now, the federal government bureaucrats think they can do anything and get away with it, and they can. So we need to change the laws to say, if you do these kind of things, there will be personal liability and criminal consequences for abusing your role as a government bureaucrat to go after American citizens.
Yeah. And if there are consequences, that's how you scare the hell out of would-be tyrants, people who would go on to abuse their power in the future. Do you think that Joe Biden will actually be the nominee in the end for the Democrats, or do you think the end of his presidency is approaching?
Well, I've been saying for 2 years that he will be a one-term president, that he will at some point have to go before the American people and say, I will not seek nor will I accept the nomination of the Democrat Party. And just like LBJ did, it's going to be because his own party is coming to him and saying, we are going to put somebody else in front of you. And I think the more this corruption scandal comes before the American people and the Republicans bring it out, I think that you are going to see Democrats say, we've got to change course ASAP, because they've got to have a primary. They've got to be able to get through the whole process, figuring out who would be their nominee. The longer they go on, the worse it's going to be for the party. And I think you're going to see major candidates jump in the race to run against him, just beyond Robert F. Kennedy.
Yeah, something's going to happen here. I did see Robert F. Kennedy was saying this morning that he's been requesting Secret Service protection, and Alejandro Mayorkas, as of this morning, has denied him. So he's a candidate for president. He is very well known. Clearly, is on the receiving end of a lot of animus in our country and says that, hey, look, the security situation is perilous for him. But here's the Biden administration, because they don't even want to dignify that Joe Biden would have an opponent who's on the Democrat side. They don't even want to give him Secret Service protection to suggest that he's an authentic opponent.
And he is an authentic opponent. If other candidates don't get in the race, he could be the nominee. I mean, if I were Bobby Kennedy, I would be coming out every day pointing out how outrageous this scandal is, that the Biden administration was using the office of the vice president to ingratiate themselves and utilize and using the money from our enemies, the communist Chinese government,
yes,
to ingratiate themselves. I mean, that is putting our national security at risk from blackmail and everything else. And it is essentially treason. And if I were Kennedy, I would be going in front of the American people every day, and this would be the number one topic that I'd be talking about.
Ted Harvey, I can't help but notice that the biggest countries in which we have suspicions about Joe Biden are also the countries that are either our biggest adversaries or the ones we're most intimately involved in. Ukraine, and of course the conflict they have with Russia, as well as China. How concerned are you about how compromised Joe Biden is with respect to those countries?
For that very reason. He can be blackmailed by these two governments, and there is a reason why we are up to our ears in scandals with them, not to mention the fact that they were flying spy balloons across the entire country.
Yes.
And Joe Biden did nothing about it until it was cleared the continent. Why is that? There's been no reasonable explanation for why they allowed that to happen. And it wasn't just once, it was multiple times. And this administration allowed it to happen. He is compromised. It is a threat to our national security. And the media and the people who are supposed to be looking out for us, the national security industry, is not doing anything to bring this issue to bear. And he literally could bring us to World War III in Ukraine, and the media is not talking about it.
No, not at all. No accountability for Chinese espionage, yet you have Donald Trump currently being charged with crime under the Espionage Act for a document dispute with his top political opponent. That's the world we live in right now.
That's exactly right. And the American people, I think, I see right through this. And I think that's why you see Donald Trump leading in the polls, not just by 50% in the Republican primary, but you're also seeing him win in the general election polls as well. And I think it's only going to get worse for Biden as we move forward, and the Democrats are going to have to make a quick decision on what they're going to do about it.
Yeah, very quick. It's good. Things are going to change a lot, I think, over the course of the next week. Finally, Ted Harvey, I know that you're concerned about Cori Bush, the squad Democrat, Congresswoman Cori Bush. Tell us about her ethics problems.
Well, one of many Democrat congresswomen that we have filed FEC election violations against. And what she was doing during her campaign is she was paying through campaign donations her boyfriend, who she had put down on her FEC reports that he was a security guard. And he is not a licensed security guard. She was just funneling money to him for, more corruption by Democrats, funneling money to friends and family. And we called her out, and she has since married said boyfriend, security guard. And surprisingly, she's continuing to put on her FEC reports, even though he is her husband now, she's paying her family members with campaign finance donations to be a security guard, even though he's not licensed to be a security guard in their state. So I think that this is just more examples of Democrats ingratiating themselves and their family with donor money, taxpayer money, or foreign government's money. And we're going to hold their feet to count every time we catch them doing it.
Please do. All right. Ted Harvey, again, chairman of the committee to defeat the president. Sir, thank you for being on with us today. Really appreciate your time.
You bet, buddy. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. God bless. Have a great day.
You too. Claire McCaskill is a cartoon character who used to be a senator from Missouri, and she was on television last night on Ms. NBC, and she had this to say about all those mean Republicans hassling poor old Hunter Biden.
They are going to try to indict a father for loving his son who has been addicted to drugs and or alcohol, and without evidence of the father doing anything other than loving that son. And that, I think, doesn't fly with most of the American people. It may fly within that small calcified circle of the Trumpers who want to believe that somehow Joe Biden was involved in nefarious dealings, but there's no evidence.
Do you think she looks in the mirror or something before she does these television appearances and says to herself, what's the most brazen, brain-dead, demented take I could possibly have on this subject? The story of Hunter Biden is a story of a father who loves his son. This is the lamest and most hilarious defense we've heard. And she's not the first to vocalize it, but she's just the latest, and it's fantastic. It's just a story of a father who loves his son. Stop picking on him. Yeah, just like the story of the German shepherds that Biden can't raise correctly, biting the Secret Service, is really a story of Joe Biden loving his dogs. He just lets them chew up the Secret Service agents. That's how generous he is. That's right. When Joe Biden trips and hits his face on a flight of stairs, that's because he just loves modes of transportation. He's a big fan of stairs. He loves hugging them. It's a story of a president who loves his stairs. What are these excuses? They're what you say when you have nothing to say. They're out of excuses for this guy. Coming up, Cheryl Chumley is going to talk to us about Joe Biden's administration persecuting his political opponents with the Justice Department, now going after Donald Trump's maintenance guy. All ahead. Well, good afternoon to you. It is 5:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Some breaking news for you. Joe Biden now acknowledging that he has a seventh grandchild. Jeez. In an exclusive statement to People, they say, our son Hunter and Navy's mother, London, are working together to foster a relationship that's in the best interests of their daughter. So Joe Biden deciding to use a supermarket tabloid magazine to announce that he does indeed acknowledge his granddaughter, and he hopes this scandal goes away now. Stop hassling him about it. A lot more ahead, but first, let's get to the great Cheryl Chumley, who's standing by. She's the opinion editor of the Washington Times and the host of the Bold and Blunt podcast. She's also the author of the fantastic book, Lockdown, the Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. Cheryl, happy Friday to you. Good to have you with us.
Happy Friday, Vince. Thank you for having me.
It is wild to watch this Biden White House and this Biden administration. The Justice Department this week, we've been talking throughout the program, has been particularly out of control, trying to orchestrate sweetheart deals for Hunter Biden, dropping charges for Sam Bankman-Fried, this massive Democrat donor. And now they're coming after Donald Trump again. This is Joe Biden's top political opponent. They're interfering in our upcoming election already, and they've added some charges to go after Donald Trump's maintenance worker at Maralago. What's happening here?
Yeah, they got the property manager, don't they? And I think last time they got the valet, so they're coming on strong for Donald Trump. And look, if anybody at this point does not think this Justice Department is weaponized, targeting Donald Trump and Donald Trump supporters, all with a desperate play to keep him from running and winning in 2024, I mean, your head has to be in the sand, because if you look at just this week's headlines, as you just pointed out, Vince, it's crazy what this Justice Department is doing.
And it's more fodder for the leftist media, for the corporate press, because they love this. They treat this pursuit of Donald Trump as if it's A, legitimate, and B, the most important story in America. It's every little iteration. It's like chasing O.J. Simpson in a helicopter and the white Bronco on the run. It's all of it. That's the way they treat this story. I happen to think that a document dispute is a much smaller deal than the current president of the United States being corrupted by places like Ukraine and China.
Well, I do too, and sane American voters who are aware of the very pro-liberal slant of the media do as well. And if it were the documents that were the issue here, then we need to back it up a bit and go back to Joe Biden and his boxes of documents in the garage in proximity of Hunter Biden and who knows else. We even need to go back to Mike Pence. It can't be just one person, one Donald Trump. And he's the reason that our democracy in America is falling. So it reeks of hypocrisy. There's a two-tier system going on here with Democrats. It's blind eyes toward their corruption, and anything that can be drummed up as the odor of corruption against a Republican, particularly Donald Trump, that's what we want to watchdog on as far as the mainstream media goes.
Cheryl, I was speaking to a family member recently who was saying to me, well, is it possible that Trump violated some laws here and maybe he messed up and maybe we should hold him accountable? And I'm saying to myself, wait a second, you have to accept that the Justice Department is legitimate to even begin thinking about something like that. And right now they have demonstrated that they don't have legitimacy and they don't have any credibility given their constant abuse of not just political figures, but of the American people, Cheryl.
Yeah, and the good thing is, no matter how hard the media tries to paint Donald Trump as worthy of the orange jumpsuit and behind bars, his polls keep rising. So the light of optimism here is that while we watch the news, and we watch it all the time, right, because that's our job, and we see how this thing breaks down and how the left goes into all these different rabbit holes, most people in America aren't paying attention to every little allegation that Jack Smith brings forward, or every time a valet or a property manager is indicted over something. Most people know that Donald Trump is under attack, and they're willing to see this thing played to the end. So long as he stays the course and continues his run for the White House, he's not going to lose support.
He apparently said this week, it may have been this morning in an interview, that he said that even if he was imprisoned, it wouldn't stop his presidential run. He'd continue. And it's, of course, his right to. I agree with you. It has increased his support. Every time we've heard another persecution dropped, it is only increased his support in the Republican primary. But I do think that there's a tactic here that's at work, which is to elevate him in the Republican primary, knowing that this kind of attack is only going to make it more likely that he win, but to also dirty him up. You mentioned a moment ago that that a lot of voters aren't going to be following all of the details, and maybe that's what they want. Maybe the goal is just to make him appear like a criminal and hurt him in the general election. Do you think that's at play here?
I mean, I do think that's a strategy, right? But seriously, it's a poor strategy, because when hasn't Donald Trump been dirtied up by the left, right? Before he was even inaugurated, if you remember correctly, they were calling for his impeachment. On day one of his inauguration, they were calling for his impeachment. So it's been one constant call for, impeachment and persecution and prosecution against this guy after another. And I think the American people really, at this point, they ought to vote for Donald Trump, not in spite of the indictments, but actually because of them. Because what they're doing to Donald Trump, think of that being you or me or the average American. If they do this with Donald Trump and he goes quietly into that good night and hides in his home and disappears from politics, that will only embolden the left, and they will come for all the Trump supporters well into the future.
It's a good thing for him that he's a billionaire, because he can sustain the fight. That's a good thing. I wouldn't be able. I don't know about you, Cheryl. I couldn't sustain it. I wouldn't be able to afford it. I'd be out of house and home. I'd have to settle in order just to rescue my family.
Yeah, and remember, the people who are crying about Donald Trump now and complaining that, well, he carries too much baggage, it's Ron DeSantis' time, he was a good guy for the time, but now it's time for him to leave. Well, first off, the next Republican candidate, the left will do the same too, because one win only emboldens. And second off, how can you complain about Donald Trump refusing to back down now, when it was that very principle that won him the White House and that won him such cheers from conservatives in America in the first place?
Well, Trump's obligation now, in addition to winning in order to fight back against all of this, is to gut the systems that are making this possible in the first place. So for those people who are considering an alternative like a Ron DeSantis, My sense is that the reason that they're supporting him is because they love Trump. They voted for him twice, and they're looking at what's left, what happened while Trump was in office, and thinking, okay, these same corrupt systems are still in place. I need somebody who can take them out. And Trump is trying to make the argument right now, I've learned my lessons. I'm going to come in. I'm going to be more aggressive. I know exactly who to go after at this point. But you can see why, to the extent that there is any separation in the field, there's not much. Trump has the overwhelming majority. But for consideration for any of these other guys, in particular people like Vivek Ramaswamy and Ron DeSantis, that's where it comes from, I think, Cheryl.
Yeah, I mean, there's a logical rationale behind that, right? But I just disagree with the premise. I just think that the reason that Trump is so under attack is that he stood strong on his America First principles. It wasn't just a motto to him. And the next Republican who comes into office who tries to do the same will suffer the same attacks from the left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've seen it every time. Every Republican candidate, for a long time, has always been subjected to this idea that they're Hitler, they're going to destroy the country, they're the worst person who's ever run for president. That's the routine. Donald Trump didn't work to placate any of these people, and for that they resent him. He didn't advance their agenda. He's opposed to them on the Ukraine stuff and on and on. And so their desire to crush him only grows.
Yeah, it's the 6 ways from Sunday that Senator Schumer warned about, that the deep state will go after you if you take them on. And that's exactly what's taking place against Trump. And you're right, the point you made a couple moments ago about other candidates desiring to dismantle some of these organizations in D.C. that have been the attack dogs against Trump for so long. That does need to happen. Republicans used to stand in unity about calling for the abolishment of, say, the Department of Education or the federal EPA, and that talk has disappeared. I think it's high time to bring that back. And Vivek, I'm just going to stick with his first name. He is one of the candidates, at least, who is out there talking about it. But I think Trump, this time around, will be on board with that.
Well, you've written the book on this subject, Lockdown, the Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. But what we're witnessing is these government agencies that have assumed all of this power unto themselves, and these politicians who are playing along with it, by and large in Washington, who are depriving Americans of their liberty. So the reason that these agencies either need to be knocked out entirely or replaced entirely in some cases is because they're all actively restricting our freedom. And they're taking political disputes and turning them into criminal matters. We have people's homes being raided because they're pro-life and they pray outside of abortion clinics. Things have gotten really dangerous, Cheryl.
Yeah, it's really, and you know from previous discussions with me, all roads go back to this. It's the loss of God-given individual liberties. Really, if Americans stood strong, as they should have over the years, for their individual rights and did not allow government to grow and become the provider for all, then we wouldn't be facing these perils from so many different levels right now. The biggest threat America has right now is coming from the globalist bureaucrats, right, who are all too happily working with this White House administration to put in place provisions and agendas that will be very difficult to reel back, no matter who the next president is. And if we insist as American citizens that we have God-given individual liberties, and even the President of the United States is our public servant, that changes the narrative, that changes the atmosphere, and that's where we need to be.
Right. You need to readjust your thinking, because there's a lot of Americans who want mommy and daddy government to police a lot of stuff, including, so say if they have left-wing political values, it seems those include today not a liberal attitude on free speech. I mean that in the classical way. They want speech shut down. They want debate shut down. They want censorship in all of our public spaces, and they want to demonize anybody who has an opposing view. That is a destructive attitude and the kind of thing that will destroy the country.
Which is all the more reason to get rid of the Federal Department of Education, right? Because this is where that groundswell is being bred. Our younger generations are being taught to hate America, believe America is inherently racist, and therefore America's governing documents must be torn up, shredded, and replaced with something more Marxist in tone.
Yeah, they want us to be convinced that our history is illegitimate. So the other piece is not just the current Department of Education, but what the left has in store for us if they ever get a hold of pre-K, because they've been saying that they want universal pre-K, and they sell it under the guise of, well, look, mom and dad can go to work, and now we'll have all this funding in order to have the kids in school. But what really is happening is that the federal government would then take over the education of our youngest, most malleable minds.
Yeah, and what the frightening aspect is, because what you described, of course, the left has been lusting for that sort of power for decades, right?
Yes.
But the frightening aspect now is that there are too many parents in America who seem all too willing to give up their parental authority so long as the government comes in and takes their kids and then gives them that me time that they themselves have been conditioned to believe that they're justified in taking. So it's the tone of the parents in America that has shifted. They actually think that government, in many respects, does a better job of taking care of their kids than they do.
Isn't that sad? What a sad statement. And then lastly, you know, the nature of what the government seems to advance here. And I know you and I are engaging in a very broad discussion now, not just on the Justice Department attacking Donald Trump, but I've noticed that they constantly are trying to enable isolation. They want to isolate kids from parents. They want to isolate kids from one another. Increasingly, kids are not even interacting with one another. They're tied to their devices. You're looking at government efforts, especially on the left, to advance legalize marijuana literally everywhere, to create dependency, to create isolation, to sort of dampen people, to make them less sharp in terms of thinking about their government and less critical. It is nonstop, Cheryl.
And didn't the face mask play into that agenda so very cleverly, right? Which is yet another reason why I detested the whole face mask movement and so forth. But look, what it's really about, it's about tearing down the idea of humanity, right? It's about making it seem as if you're just alive and functioning to serve the state.
Yes.
Instead of alive and functioning because God created you in his image and you were given a specific purpose and mission on life in order to glorify him. And so that's really what it comes down to. It's about stripping humanity from humans so big government can come in and instill them with the idea that their purpose in life is to serve the collective.
Well, God bless you for saying everything you just said and for constantly being such a good warrior for human decency and our country. Thank you, Cheryl Chumley. I really appreciate your time today. I told you coming into this last segment that Joe Biden is now finally acknowledging his 7th grandchild, his granddaughter Navy, the one that they pretended didn't exist. They don't put her name on stockings. He keeps saying he has 6 grandchildren. He's got 7 grandkids. They've been ignoring this kid in Arkansas. And People Magazine gets the exclusive from the White House. It was released at 5 o'clock today. So this is quite literally a Friday news dump. They decided to release it at 5 o'clock on a Friday in the hopes that you wouldn't pay any attention to it. And now they will have an answer. Corinne will have an answer in the book now. She'll look down and she'll say, President Biden has 7 grandchildren, and then she'll move on. No further questions. This is a personal matter. I direct all questions to the grandchild. So now you have a bunch of reporters all tweeting for the first time about this, like Jeremy Diamond over at CNN. President Biden, for the first time, acknowledges his granddaughter, Navy. For the first time. How are these people out there? There's a bunch of reporters all tweeting about it now. He finally acknowledges his granddaughter. What do you mean, finally? Did you ask him? Did you ever ask the White House? Were you ever out there saying, hey, why are you such a scumbag? Did anybody in your network or at your publication ever ask that question? Or is this the first time you're tweeting about this? Joe Biden acknowledges that he has a 7th granddaughter. Yeah, because there was no pressure for him before to even say it. This is nuts. Totally nuts. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris is out there telling us why the Biden administration sucks.
Most Americans are a $400 unexpected expense away from bankruptcy.
Oh, okay. That's a great campaign statement. Everybody's almost bankrupt because of the Biden administration. Also, Kamala Harris, deep thoughts today on the nature of democracy.
The nature of democracy there are 2 sides to it in terms of the nature of it. There's a duality. On the one hand, when democracy is intact, it is incredibly strong in terms of the strength it bestows on the individuals, in terms of their rights and their freedoms.
In terms of?
Incredibly strong.
Incredibly.
In terms of what it does for its people. On the other hand, it's very fragile.
Oh, I see. Very deep thoughts. You know who has actual deep thoughts that are worth listening to? The great one, Mark Levin, up next.